we are approaching the 250th anniversary of the Revolutionary War, 1776 to 2026.
Charles Baxley had read my article in Wildlife magazine, and he said, Dennis, there were a lot of revolutionary battles that took place on the Cherokee Path. And I said, well, that makes sense, because it was the only way to get from Charleston into the interior of South Carolina, so it just makes sense. There'd be a lot of battles there. He said, well, he said, do you think it would be possible for you and your wife to go out and GPS map these vestigial segments that y'all found, and then we could put them on a modern road map, and it'd be a driving tour of old battle sites? I said, would I? This had been a dream of mine. I've talked to graduate students and professors, and do you have anybody who might be interested in taking you on this project? Because like I say, where those segments are, there are exactly two people who know, me and Jackie. And so, you know, when we're gone, that information is just gone, and everybody will just think they're an old washed out ditch or something. So we now have a project, and Jackie and I are well underway. We're going out and GPSing these various sites, and then ultimately we'll put them on a road map that one day you'll be able to drive and see where all the Cherokees lived and where all these revolutionary battles took place. This is a deep dive into Cherokee culture. Now, it's not everything. Cherokee culture is rich and covers a 1,000-year period, so we're going to cover, I think, most things you would be interested in. Let's start with some myths about the Cherokees, and there are lots of them. Did you know that the word Cherokee is not a Cherokee word? Think about that. At first European contact, which would be Hernando de Soto in 1540, who eventually, you know, he came in the Gulf Coast, but he eventually made way up here in the mountains and encountered the Cherokees. And he had been told when he was in the Panhandle of Florida by the Appalachian Indians who lived down there that De Soto told them he was looking for gold. He showed them a piece of gold, and they said, Cherokee, 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 or something like that, Cherokee. They wrote it Charike, I think. It was the Appalachian Indians in Florida who knew of the Cherokees and said that they were, and Cherokee in their language meant they were cave people, that they lived in caves, and they did hunt, have hunting shelters and hunting camps and rock shelters. So anyway, so De Soto goes throughout the entire Southeast, and when he encounters the Cherokees, he starts calling them Cherokees, and they say, why are you calling them Cherokees? For 1,000 years we've been Uni-Yung-Wea, the principal people. Now all of a sudden they're calling them Cherokees. Well, finally around the 1750s or 60s, they just gave up and said, whatever. If you want to call us Cherokees, fine, but we're Uni-Yung-Wea, and we still are. Today, they are still Uni-Yung-Wea. Did you know that the Appalachian Mountains were named for that very same reason? De Soto comes through 1540 in the Panhandle of Florida. You know Apalachicola Bay down there near Mobile? He encountered the Appalachian Indians. He assumed, and you know what they say about assuming things, you'll never assume anything. He assumed that when they told him they were the Appalachian Indians, that all Indians that he encountered in the Southeast were Appalachian Indians. So when he asked him about gold and they point north and he finally gets up here in the mountains, he said, well, these are the Appalachian Mountains. Because the Appalachian Indians control this territory. And did you know where the word Indian comes from? That one comes from probably one of the most colossal mistakes in human history. Columbus, when he sailed the ocean blue in 1792, 1492, and he never set foot on North America, by the way, but he landed in Hispaniola, which is Cuba, and the Caribbean islands down there, and he met the Carib Indians. Well, he had calculated, and other cartographers had advised him, map people, and advised him there should be about 2,000 miles from Spain to the Indies. What they had on their map is Indies. They knew about China, you know, southeastern China that way because of the East India trade company. But so they calculated, well, sure enough, so we're around 2,000 miles. He runs up on land, these islands, these Caribbean islands, and he says, well, this must be the Indies. they did not understand that there was North America, Central America, Mexico, and South America in between them and the Indies. So he mistakenly thought he had landed in the Indies, which was on their maps. And so all the native Caribbean island Indians, he called Indians because he assumed that was the Indies. And so we still call them Indians today for that reason. Kind of incredible, really. Anybody who is from this area probably went to Cherokee in the 1950s and 60s because it was a major tourist, it was a must-do tourism destination. I went many, many times as a child. Matter of fact, most of these cars look at date to the 40s, more than 50s. But anyway, what they learned, because they knew they were a tourist trap and that was their primary source of income, so they knew that our concept of Indians was a full head dress and they live in teepees, because that's what we saw on the westerns, you know, on TV. And cowboys and Indians. So when you got to Cherokee, there was this huge 20-foot tall teepee, which Cherokee shouldn't even know what a teepee looked like. That's the Plains Indians out in Wyoming, Colorado, and North Dakota and that area. Cherokees didn't even know what a teepee looked like, and there was Chief Big Wampum. You remember Chief Big Wampum for $5, and he was in a full Indian headdress with feathers and went down to the ground, because that's what we had seen on TV. In fact, if you had encountered a Cherokee warrior in the 1750s and 60s, this is what he would look like. No full headdress, no, you know, you can see he's got on a buckskin hunting shirt, powder horn, he's got a gun, not a bow and arrow, shaved head, and usually they would leave like a mohawk haircut, more like a tuft of hair at the back, not necessarily like a mohawk haircut. This is Dragon Canoe, who's an interesting figure in history. This is Atakula Kula, who I describe as the Secretary of State for the Cherokees. He was a chief negotiator, short little fellow, around 5 feet. This is his son, Dragon Canoe. It was also, the Cherokees had 2 chiefs in every village, 2 types of chiefs, war chiefs and peace chiefs. And during times of war, the war chiefs were in charge. That overruled the peace chiefs. Whatever they said, that's what they did. The reverse is true, that if they were not at war, then the peace chiefs ruled. Dragon Canoe was an important war chief, and I don't have time to tell you his whole story. I just wanted you to see how very different most people's concept is of what the Cherokees and Indians in general would look like. This is authentic, this is a real deal. That's a contemporaneous pen and ink drawing of Dragon Canoe in the 1760s. Dragon Canoe.
Dragon Canoe.
2 words, Dragon Canoe. And I will tell you the little story about, it's been repeated enough that I think it's probably true. You know, if something appears in print 3 times, it's true. Especially if you see it on the internet. This is the delegation of Cherokees, by the way, that went to London to meet with the king. Not what they were showing us in the 1950s on TV, what Cherokees looked like. The reason Dragon Canoe was called Dragon Canoe, how he got his name, was he desperately wanted to be a warrior, even as a little boy. Always wanted to go off with the war parties and everything, and they said, no, you're too small. And they said, when you're old enough and strong enough to drag a canoe a certain distance, then you can become a warrior. Now, this was not the birch bark canoes of the Northeast, you know, that one man could throw, you know, holders. Cherokee canoes were made out of a pine log, usually a 30-inch or bigger pine log that had been hollowed out by burning and chopping and this kind of stuff. They probably weighed 300 pounds, if not more. So to just drag a canoe 10 feet would be it'd take a strong, muscular adult to do that. Well, finally he got to the point where he could drag the canoe, and he became a warrior as a teenage boy. So anyway, that's the origin of his name. This also, in a little more modern times, I think this picture is probably from the 40s or 50s. This is a Cherokee ball player, but very different from the concept we used to have when I was growing up. Let's talk about where they lived, because I don't think most people understand. I have described in my writing several times that the Cherokees were the most powerful, the most numerous tribe or nation in the southeast, and both those things are true. You won't believe how big their territory was. You can see South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Kentucky, on and on. This is the area the Cherokees laid claim to. Now that doesn't mean they had a deed or a title to the land. That was not their concept of ownership. This is the land that they claimed they could defend as hunting territory. In other words, they were free to hunt in and roam about because they had the manpower, could put the number of warriors on the field to defend that amount of territory. It's extensive just in South Carolina, and you can see in western North Carolina, huge. What, a third of the whole state? In South Carolina, this takes you all the way down to the head of the Edisto, Ashpoo, Fungi River, which is called the Ace Basin, the way people refer to it in South Carolina. That's down near Aiken, South Carolina, where those three rivers have the headwaters. It goes all the way, this little crook in the South Carolina state line is near Lancaster, South Carolina. So they claimed everything over to where the Catawbas were, east and north of the Catawba River. That's a fur piece, you know. All the way into Georgia, certainly the northern third of Georgia, some of Alabama, almost all of Tennessee. What is that, West Virginia?
Kentucky.
Yeah, Kentucky, that's West Virginia. Yeah, West Virginia. So it's a huge area. But now you got to understand, the Cherokees, and I think archaeologists don't agree about it a lot, but they pretty much agree that the Cherokees have been here for about 1,000 years. Now I mentioned DeSoto in 1540. That's our first documented record. Somebody who actually encountered the Cherokees and wrote down what he saw and where they were and this kind of thing. And by the way, the record of the documentary record of DeSoto's trip through the Southeast is pretty extensive and rich with detail. But that was 1540. So we have 500 years of documented record, documentary record. Somebody actually wrote down what they saw. And then 500 years of prehistory. The Cherokees were here with nobody here, no European here to record their history. And I'll show you a little bit about how they would live during that period of time. Now, I know you can't make out detail, don't strain trying to, because I'm going to show you another slide with a close-up of it. I just want you to see how throughout that territory that their villages and towns and hamlets were all clustered over in this area right here. That's a little bit of close-up here. You can see northeastern Georgia, northwestern South Carolina, western North Carolina. There's the Cherokee Reservation, the Qualla Reservation today. Even homing in a little more, get into South Carolina and western North Carolina. We live not very far from Fort Prince George, which is down under where Fort Prince George was across the river was the Kiowa Indian Village, one of 7 mother towns that the Cherokees had throughout their nation. The other one was East Totowa here. Those two were both mother towns. You can see Sugartown, Quackarachi, Toxaway. If you've ever been down Highway 11 in South Carolina, you're going from Table Rock, South Carolina, to Oconee County over near Walhalla. You cross Lake Kiowa. You know, big expand bridge there, big water on both sides. If you look on the right side of the bridge, big, wide, open, expansive section of water, that was a floodplain, and there are $1 million homes now all around the lake there. That was Toxaway, right here. So that kind of puts it in perspective. East Totowa was a little upstream from there, Quackarachi just downstream, Sugartown, then Fort Prince George and Kiowa. The southernmost was Seneca, which is right at Clemson University. As a matter of fact, if you go to the Madrid Center at Clemson University, which is their big conference center, and you look across Lake Hartwell, that's Seneca Town, it's right over there. So that's a big area where they live. A little more definition, because some of you are familiar with Lake Jocassee. There was a Jocassee town. This was that frustrating period in history. As a writer, it's just a constant source of irritation when people made their S's look like an F. So there was like, you read the Declaration of Independence and Congress looks like Congress, with two F's in it. But anyway, this map was made during that period of time. That's Cherokee Town. There's Toxaway that I talked about over here on the Kiwi River, east of Towie, and they call it, well, it was Quarachi, but we call it Warachi Sugar Town, and Fort Prince George, as I mentioned. So here's the Kiwi River going on up here, and these would be over in Oconee County, right here, Tomasi Town. There was a big battle there in Tomasi Town. Now, here's my article that I mentioned, The Key to Carolina, and the reason it's titled The Key to Carolina is because in 1756, the royal governor, remember this was a British colony, it was not a state. The British governor was James Glenn, who actually, of all the royal governors, had a strikingly good relationship with the Cherokees. Others just were all ham-fisted, didn't know how to deal with these native people, and had disastrous results. James Glenn, on the other hand, realized right over here, right after he was assigned to the job, he comes and he appraises the situation, and he realizes that the Cherokees are the most powerful, most numerous tribe in the Southeast. There's a whole lot more of them than there are us down here in Charleston. And the entire Charleston village, I'm not sure I have a slide that shows this. I used to, but I think I took it out. But anyway, Charlestown, before the Revolutionary War, it was two words, Charlestown, for Charles, King of England at that time, Charles II. And so it's called Charlestown. Charlestown was nothing more in the very early 1700s than a palisaded or walled village down at the battery on the Cooper River side, and the Cherokee Path that I've talked about went right through the gates of the family. So it was just a walled-in little village down there. They could be overwhelmed at any time by the Cherokees, or actually the Yemasees down on the coast tried it in 1750. It scared the colony pretty badly because they almost did it. There were 15 coastal tribes along the coast of South Carolina. They got together with the Yemasees, and at first the Cherokees sided with the Yemasees, but the royal governor, James Glenn, sent an emissary up to the Cherokees and told them that if they would side with them, with the British, they would trade deer skins with them, and they had all that, you could get guns and iron pots and all the things they'd never had before. And I said, okay, we could do that. And so it was that decision that probably saved the colony. Otherwise, this would be Yemassee, South Carolina. You know? So anyway, Governor Glenn realized that establishing a relationship with the Cherokees was key to the survival of Carolina. Key to Carolina. The Cherokees, this is the Cherokee Path that I've been talking about here, just so you can see. It crosses the Saluda River at Earl's Ford, stays west of the Saluda River. The genius, from my perspective, of the Cherokee Path is that's about 250 miles from Charleston to Earl's Ford up on the Saluda River. Crosses the state of South Carolina diagonally. And remember, this path was established before there were Landsat photos or even maps or anything like that. All the way to Charleston without crossing any of the 4 major rivers in South Carolina, which would have been a huge problem. You know, if you got to cross a river and it's, you know, a quarter of a mile wide, like, you know, the PD at some point says that wide and 30 foot deep, it's just not possible. So that's one of the things that made it such a popular path from Charleston anywhere in the interior, and it's why there were so many battles during the Revolutionary Fall. That's the only way to get to the interior. You know, today, if you were leaving Charleston and you wanted to go anywhere else in South Carolina, you get on I-26. And for 100 years or more, the Cherokee Path was very much like I-26. Went by 96, where the Star Fort was during the Revolutionary War. This is the area where we live. We actually live between the Saluda River and the Kiwi River. Another map has a little more details. It's kind of blurry, but at least it does show that's DeWitt's Corner, which is due west South Carolina, where Erskine University is. Jane and I, when was it, back before Christmas, we went down with a little working party or a posse of people who were just interested, and we GPS'd a half-mile long segment of the Cherokee Path. It was on one property owner's property, and I had known it was there because I had looked at it from, are you familiar with LiDAR? It's a technique that will show you any depression in the terrain. If it's a sunken grave or a ditch or something like that, it shows up as a dark line. I knew it was there. I didn't know the property owner. I couldn't get access to it. But we had met over the years working, trying to locate the Cherokee Path down in the New West area. We'd met a realtor. He became really fascinated with this Cherokee Path thing. Terry Campbell was his name. And I contacted Terry. And I said, Terry, Jane and I are now in the process of trying to GPS these things, and I would really like to do this section that I've known is there, but do you know the property? And he said, do I know them? They're good friends of mine. I'll give them a call and get permission for you to go down there. And when we get down there, not only do we have permission to access the property, the guy's there with his Kubota tractor and a trailer and about 6 or 8 camp chair seats there for us to sit in and be hauled down to the reason that section is so important is it's a ford on the stream. It's a rock shelf where there's a shoal, you know. To cross any stream other than something maybe, 2 feet wide or 3 feet wide, and this is more like a 10 or 12, maybe 20 foot wide stream, you had to have a solid bottom, a rock shelf. Otherwise, let me just give you an example. During the Cherokee Wars of 1761, the James Grant campaign, there were 2,300 soldiers, some on foot, some on horses. The wagon train was 2 miles long. They had 75 head of cattle. There weren't any Burger Kings or Hardee's or Stuckey's or anything like that, so you had to carry your own food with you, and you're marching an army of 2,300 people. They would just kill beef, every evening, and that would be their protein for the day. But anyway, the point is, you take all these people and put them through a creek. After the first 2 wagons go through, now you got a mud hole. And the worse it gets, the more people you put through there, the worse it gets. So they had to have a hard bottom. And this one was an important one called Webb Shoals. I knew it was a historic crossing. I had documentary record to prove it. I just couldn't access the property. I said, no problem, I'll have that. So we now have their property runs from Webb Shoals, where the ford is, all the way to Highway 184 that Erskine College is on, about a half a mile. Jane thinks it's closer than a mile because we ended up walking it back. So anyway, we got that one checked off. All right, this is Muzon's map that I was so excited about when I found it at Tommy Charles' office. You see the level of detail in that map? The date on that map, done by Henry Muzon, who was the Surveyor General of South Carolina at the time, is 1775. 1775, and that level of detail. The creeks are named, the Cherokee villages are named, mountains are shown. The thing that, for me, that was so exciting is now you've got a map that I could go find these things. If it shows that the creek crossed this stream, which is still named, well, that's Crow Creek. All right, I know where Crow Creek is. I mean, Jane and I live 4 miles from Crow Creek. It shows where it crosses it. In some cases, like this stream, it shows it crossing right after a tributary comes in. I can find that place. That's a point in time, in space that I can go find. So the level of detail was just incredible. This is a later map here. I'm not sure why I put this one in. I'm sure I had a good reason at that time. I think it shows the road from Fort Prince George to the Catawbas. Oh, this is Brevard. That's what it is. I want to show you how extensive the Cherokee Trail. Here it is. This is the Cherokee Trail that basically follows Highway 11 in South Carolina. Then it heads up toward Landrum. You see the South Packlet River right here? Crosses the South Packlet River right where Ingalls is, just past Landrum. If you just stay on that road, which is Highway 14, yeah. When you cross I-26 on the bridge past Ingalls, you find that crossing right there on the South Packlet River. There's actually a little historical marker there because there was a battle. Earl's Ford was called. That's another Earl's Ford. The final thing about where they lived is the Cherokees thought of themselves as living in two areas, the overhill settlements in eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina, and the lower towns in our area, Greenville, Pickens, and Oconee counties in South Carolina. The English, it was more useful to them to think of this area in the middle as the valley or the middle settlements. So the Cherokees actually had a name for this, was Otari in Cherokee, which meant over the hills, excuse me, into Tennessee. And let's see, Otari and Atar. Yeah, Atar and Otari. So the lower towns here in northwestern South Carolina and a little bit of northeastern Georgia was Atar. All right.
What was Saluda? I'm sorry.
Saluda, North Carolina? That would have been in the valley segment. It's odd because this is not a valley, but that valley, it would be in that valley middle settlements area. And it would be the eastern
And
part.
Tryon also?
Yes, yes. Anything in western North Carolina, I can't say that totally because when you get up near the Cherokee River and everything, that would have been considered the overhills. But for the most part, most of western North Carolina, Qualler Reservation in Cherokee would be in the middle settlements. And by the way, I don't mind if you have a question that applies to a slide that I have up. I really prefer that you would just go ahead and ask that question now rather than, after it's over when we're doing questions and answers. I have to go all the way back to the slide. So if there's something that you say, oh, I really want to know that, come right ahead. Now, this gets at what Governor Glenn was telling the Cherokees about the deerskin trade, and it was huge. It revolutionized Cherokee culture because now all of a sudden they had goods that they had never had before. Like I say, iron pots instead of clay pots, much more durable, less likely to get broken when you're traveling from place to place. The deerskin trade in the 1740s, which was kind of, it rose and then peaked and then kind of dwindled off over time. In the 1740s, there were 200,000 deerskin going annually out of Charleston to England. And these were bringing big bucks. From England's perspective, all the colonies were a money-making venture. This wasn't, escaping from religious persecution or something. This was about making money. These colonies were originally given as a favor to the 8 Lords Proprietor as a gift for something they had done for the king. And they were a gift because they had the potential to make money, a lot of money. And the deerskin trade, I wrote in the article in the Wildlife magazine, I remember this because I had to do quite a bit of research to prove it was true. If you put something in the Wildlife magazine, it better be true. Or some little blue-haired lady down in Calhoun, South Carolina is going to call me, Mr. Chastain, you said so. So anyway, the deerskin trade in the 1740s was the equivalent of rice, indigo, and navel stores, which is pine tar and pitch. All those combined, it was big bucks. 200,000 deerskins a year. Again, this is the Cherokee Path. All these deerskin, most of the deerskins were coming from the Cherokee territory all the way down here. Some on their backs, some when they got horses. They had horses by 1740. And, would pull a cart or drag them, or just put them on the horse's back. But anyway, wampum. I want to cover wampum because I learned this in grammar school, maybe y'all did too, that wampum was Indian money, right? No, that's not true. In fact, there's only one tribe in what later became New York State who used wampum as money. Yeah, that's one of those things we were told in 1950. Here, have wampum, give me a shot of whiskey, In fact, wampum was first of all made from oyster shells. And of course you got to go to the coast to get oyster shells. But you see that purple spot right there? They would cut that out, smooth it down with wet sand, make a bead out of it, and make wampum out of that. The Cherokees and other southeastern tribes, I'm going to show you 3 things in succession here, were going to the coast of South Carolina annually, long before we were going 4th of July week, and it wasn't for wacky golf and endless seafood bars. They were going for oyster and clam shells to make wampum with, and then I'll show you the other two reasons there. So they're cutting that purple thing out of the middle of an oyster shell, smoothing it down. If you take that, this is like a clam shell you would find on the beach, and they look kind of like that. If you abrade by rubbing them on a rock, say a granite rock or something like that, that outer coating, look how much blue is in there. Then they would cut that up in pieces and make wampum belts. This is a wampum belt right here. That's a color one that shows you the color. You can see the workmanship that goes into one of those. Wampum, for the Cherokees and all the southeastern tribes, was basically physical evidence of good faith. If they engaged with the colony, wherever you were in the southeast, actually wampum belts were used throughout eastern North America. I don't know about west of the Mississippi, but I do know virtually all of the tribes east of the Mississippi used wampum for this reason I'm telling you, as an act of good faith. In other words, it's like signing a document. You know, it's like, okay, I remember my daddy used to say, a man is only as good as his word was his bond. Well, this was physical evidence that we are acting in good faith. And so if you signed a treaty with the British government, you would present the governor with a wampum belt. You know, a dragon canoe that I mentioned earlier, dragon canoe formed an alliance with the Six Nations in New York and Ohio and the Shawnees and on, to go to war against the whites. And the Shawnees brought him a 6-foot-long wampum belt. Unprecedented. Nobody had ever seen a 6-foot-long wampum belt, and presented it to him and said, "This, if you throw in with us, we're going to wipe the white people out." So that was the purpose of wampum belt. I want to talk a little bit about Cherokee plants. Now, I can do a whole slideshow on Cherokee plants, but I want to talk about the ones that were most important. This is Yaupon holly. It's one of the hollies, just like English holly. Yeah, you see it a lot down on the coast. It's a coastal plant. It only grows about 15 miles. Well, I've seen it as far as about Sumter, South Carolina, so 30 or 40 miles inland, but it's basically a coastal plant. It's a beautiful horticultural shrub. You can buy it at Lowe's and Home Depot and down the beach. People landscape with it. It is also the only plant in North America that makes caffeine. And it's in the leaves and twigs, not those striking red fruits, but it's in the leaves and twigs. Well, caffeine was a central component in a ceremonial drink that the Cherokees and all southeastern tribes had. When they would meet in the council house and consider grave matters of concern, they would drink this black drink. And it had, just to put a fine point on how much caffeine it had in it, if you brew a cup of strong percolated coffee, it has about 4% caffeine. If you brew a cup of tea from Yaupon holly, it has 15% caffeine. I mean, that's like knocking back 2 Red Bulls in succession. You know, you start seeing things that aren't necessarily there. So anyway, they're going down to the coast annually because it doesn't grow up here to get Yaupon holly for black drink, but also this plant, strikingly beautiful wildflower. It's considered rare in North Carolina, but I see colonies of it in South Carolina. I've gone out in the woods with botanists from the University of North Carolina who had never seen this plant right here. Wildflower books call it Indian pink. Indian pink, P-I-N-K. Sometimes Carolina pink. Historically, it was called pink root. That's what most people call it, or just pink. And even though it's a strikingly beautiful columnar flower, which obviously hummingbirds is designed for hummingbirds to pollinate, it's the root that everybody was after. And it was a marketable product like ginseng. And the reason it was so popular was there was not only was there not good sanitation in the 1700s, and I'm talking about worldwide, even in England, one of the most highly civilized cities in the world, London, people would just throw their night soil or their waste out the window onto the street. This was just common practice. In New York, in Boston, people throw their chamber pots out in the morning. It was just terrible, because people did not even have a concept of sanitation. They didn't see that as a problem, dumping in the rivers or whatever. And that's why virtually everybody had intestinal worms. And so it was a common problem, and there was only herbal remedies. Nobody had invented medicine, actually, had not developed to any degree of sophistication. There were only herbal remedies. The single best vermifuge, which is an herbal remedy for intestinal parasites, is pink root, hands down. So Cherokees were digging up pink root, taking it to Charleston, and there were barrels and barrels of pink root going out of South Carolina. So they were going down the coast. It grows as far as the coast. Actually, this photograph was taken on Wambach Creek down in the Francis Marion Forest near Charleston. Although it grows in our area too. Another one is bloodroot. If you're a wildflower person and you're out and about, you see this one right now. It's in the poppy family. It's strikingly beautiful, stark white. Has these leaves, fleshy leaves right here that fold up around the stem overnight or on cold nights and everything. The reason it's called bloodroot is because this is the root, and it kind of looks red, right? Well, you break it in half, and it sure enough looks like, you remember when you were a little kid, maybe you were riding your bicycle and you fell on the sidewalk, it wasn't really a cut, it was an abrasion. People call it a strawberry. You get a strawberry on your knee or something like that, and if you squeeze that, it's like you're squeezing blood out of there. Now, when I do that for demonstration like this, and I do it on the back of my hand, it's not red, it's yellow. But the Cherokees used it as a basket dye, and also for face paint too, but mostly for dyeing basket, because baskets, which the Cherokees were famous for their river cane baskets, and they would dye them with bloodroot. And one final thing about bloodroot, in the 1840s, the single best and most popular remedy for a cold, just a regular old cold, was 1 drop of bloodroot juice on a sugar cube. It apparently worked. Another one, and I just mentioned river cane. River cane was at the core of their whole society. They made their beds out of it. They made mats, baskets to carry the children, baskets to trap fish in, fish baskets. They made bows and arrows out of it, darts. It was like duct tape and WD-40. 1,000 uses. We have 3 species in the Carolinas. This is mountains of North and South Carolina. This one is pretty rare. Well, it's uncommon. But this is a Rundinaria appalachiana. And the distinction is it only grows about 30 inches tall. But the Cherokee, the distinction between it and a lookalike, which is a Rundinaria tecta, is that this one doesn't lose its leaves in the winter. It's evergreen. The other one does. I mean, they look exactly alike except for that one characteristic. This one I'll show what they use it for. This is Cherokee were expert with blowguns. They would take a river cane, hollow out those membranes that are in there, and then make a dart. You see these darts down here? They're mostly made out of cattail fuzz. You know, it looks just like a cattail actually. And then a dart they would make out of the stem of one of these. See, they're just the right diameter right here. And for small game hunting, it's said that even little Cherokee boys could shoot the eye out of a squirrel with a blowgun at 50, 60 yards, which is kind of incredible. But yeah, there's some of the darts. Their baskets were just legendary. They were such expert, and this still amazes me. They were so expert at weaving baskets. They had one that was a double weave. I don't know how that worked, but it was a double weave. It was watertight. It would hold water. How could you weave river cane into something that would hold water? Yet the documentary record is clear. They were, and they're still made by the Cherokees. These are some more modern examples of Cherokee basketry now. Have you all ever been down on the coast of South Carolina, say between Charleston and Mount Pleasant, where the Gullah ladies are out there on the Highway 17 selling the sweetgrass baskets? before the Gullah ladies ever even arrived in South Carolina. Now, historically, the Gullah ladies used to sell their baskets on the Customs House in Charleston. Customs House is still there. They would just sit on the day that business was transacted there, they'd sell their sweetgrass baskets there. Cherokees, when their husbands were out gathering oyster shells and clam shells and digging pink root, they would be selling their baskets on the steps of that same building there in Charleston. So they predate the Gullah ladies in terms of that. The artwork and handiwork in these Cherokee baskets is just fascinating, I think. This is actually an antique one here that was used. That's a fish basket. Now, I'm going to show you a fish weir in a minute so you understand the concept. And that one is also a fish basket. I'll show you in just a minute, but they had most of their villages on a river. They would construct a fish weir, which means you take stones and build a stone wall all the way across the river. Some of them had a W shape, in other words, they had two V-shaped sections like that, and they would take out, when they were fishing, they'd take these fish baskets and knock out a section of rocks, maybe 2 feet wide, put the basket in there. Then they'd have beaters to go upstream, take sticks and beat the water and run all the fish downstream. In 10 minutes, you got a basket full of fish, and that's a lot of protein. And annually, before we dammed up all the rivers, and I mean that literally in South Carolina, there's not a free-flowing river in South Carolina that flows from the source to the ocean without a dam or 2 or 3 or 4 on it. But before we dammed up all the rivers, shad, which is an ocean-going species, it's a naturalist. It spends part of its life in the ocean, but part of its life migrating like salmon back to its original source. So in the spring of the year, actually just about this time, they would migrate up the streams all the way into the mountains, and the Cherokees would catch these by the thousands and dry them for winter use. And once you dry fish, they'll last 6, 8 months or a year. So this is what they would trap them in, is these fish baskets. Corn. Corn revolutionized not only the life of the Cherokees, but Indians throughout the Southeast. It revolutionized it in the sense that before corn, and I'll tell you how they got it and when they got it in just a minute, but before corn, the Cherokees had been hunter-gatherers. There was not enough calories in any one area that would support more than just a small party of people, and you had to move on seasonally just to find enough calories to sustain you. Once they started growing corn, and they didn't, the modern Cherokees, and by modern I mean 1750s on, when we have a good documentary record, they didn't know where they got corn. They had a legend and a myth about where it came. Saluda, and I'll show you a little bit of that in a minute. But they had had it so long. Corn was developed over a 1,000-year period in Mexico, and once they got it changed everything. Because now, if you notice, all those Cherokee villages I showed you on that map, all the villages and towns are located on rivers. And the reason they're located on rivers is that's where the richest soils are. From flooding over the millennia, the nutrients are in that sand and silt that builds up, in a floodplain. So corn requires a lot of nutrients and a lot of water. As a matter of fact, people even today who farm corn, they plant it with 17 fertilizer at the planting time, and then they have to come along about 6 weeks later and side dress it with more nitrogen. It's a heavy consumer of nitrogen, so you can only grow it in the richest of soils. And this gets at what I was talking about. This would be a prehistoric Cherokee village. You see how it's kind of palisaded. You see the fence around here, circular buildings and everything on the river. And I want to show you, I believe the next shot is there's a fish weir. This is Saluda, their myth of where they got corn. And I'm not going to tell you the whole myth because it takes a chapter in the book to tell it, but it's a pretty extensive myth. Basically, it's kind of like Oedipus in the Shakespearean novel, which is a Shakespearean play. These 2 boys decide their mother is a witch. I can't remember what led them to believe she's a witch, but they believe she's a witch. Well, if she's a witch, she's got to be killed, right? and it's their job to kill her. So they kill her mother, and as she's going out through the woods, blood's dripping for her. Where every drop of blood fell, a corn plant grew, and that's how they got corn. Yeah.
And what is her name?
Saluda, S-E-L-U. Here's where they actually got corn. They got it from Mexico, and it took 1,000 years of selective breeding over a period of 1,000 years. And there's two plants. There was a wild corn plant, which was not that different except in size from modern corn plants, and there was teosinte. And teosinte was more of a branched plant with much smaller rakees, but you're starting to see something that resembles an ear of corn, and you see these are on the highly branched plant, teosinte. Well, by crossbreeding teosinte with corn, you end up with something about like this, and then eventually this, and then this is what Cherokees and when the European contact, people started calling corn Indian corn, and it was called Indian corn for a long time, like 100 years in the colonial times. Recipe books, though. The first recipe book I have is a copy of Sarah Rutledge's Carolina Housewife, late 1700s. She calls Indian corn in there. Then now you're getting into the modern hybrids here, and this is one of our modern hybrids. It's time now? Okay. All right. Jane's our timekeeper, and she just called time on me. Let me finish through with the corn. They did not plant. You remember I showed you just a few slides ago how modern cornfields look, and there's a corn stalk about every foot, and the furrows are 30 feet apart. The Cherokees didn't plant like that. They planted corn, beans, and squash, which they considered the three sisters, on a mound. And the corn stalk would be the support for the beans. Many of you probably remember cornfield beans. I do. I remember. They were made to climb up a corn stalk, cornfield beans, and then the melons and squash were down at the bottom. And you see how the squash spread out from the plant, providing a living mulch, which is good farming technique. You know, it helps hold moisture in the soil, keeps the soil from drying out. Beans climb up, and of course the corn itself. So the lesson of the legend of the three sisters, I think, is an important one. And it is that even though they were all three very different plants, they all had something to contribute to this mode of planting here. And they had the green corn ceremony in usually July and August, right before the corn started drying out, but it was still in what you would call the milk stage. In other words, if you took your thumbnail and you get this kind of white milk out of it. So the corn ceremony was a celebration. I love the corn ceremony. I write a bi-weekly column for the Greenville Journal, which is a magazine format type newspaper in Greenville. As a matter of fact, if you Google Dennis Chastain, Greenville Journal, Cherokee right now, my column that's out is about Jane and I, and it's called Mapping the Cherokee Path. There's a print edition and an online version, and it's out right now. So if you Google Greenville Journal, Dennis Chastain, Cherokee, it'll come up. But I wrote in a column some time ago that I really liked the way the Cherokees did the green corn ceremony, because it was like New Year's for us. You know, New Year's you kind of get the sense of flipping the calendar and everything is new, and we start off with a new year and everybody makes resolutions that they never keep. Well, the Cherokees at the green corn ceremony, they would drag all the furniture in the house, drag it out in the yard and burn all of their clothes. All debts are forgiven. Doesn't matter how much or who you owe stuff to, all debts are forgiven. Everything starts over. They would extinguish all the fires in the town, or the village, whichever one it was, and start anew. I just love that sense of renewal. But I wrote in the article that if I drug our furniture and my clothes out the yard, Jane would throw me out of the house. Still, it's a nice concept, you know. Let me tell you just a little. Oh, that's right. Jane says we're over, so we may have to come back, Pam. All right, let's take 10 or 15 minutes for questions and answers.
Could you
Yeah.
tell us about Cherokee Towns?
I will. Hey, this is for your
Tell us about
benefit. If
Cherokee
you wanna do
Towns.
that, we'll do that, yeah.
This isn't something that you touched upon, you may plan to, but I had heard in a class that I had taken that women were responsible for each of the houses, the
Yes.
8 house. Are you gonna go into that?
Yeah, but pretty good ways down the road. Cherokees were unique in that it was a matrilineal society. You know, we're a paternal society, a European society where men are in charge of everything. And, I mean, women didn't get to vote until 1920. So, yeah, it was a matrilineal society. Everything that a woman owned transferred, our family owned transferred to her relatives, not to the husband.
The whole of your back.
Or,
Yeah.
A lot of Native American nations.
Yeah.
or,
Yeah.
We could use more of that.
hey, I'm ready to turn the whole government over to women, and I am serious. You look at the female governors around this state, those are the best run states in that country. They're no nonsense, they're practical, they're not subject to fits of outrage. Let me just do a quick overview. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the shell mounds in Charleston.
Yeah,
How, does that tie into the wampum?
let me show you mounds. Yeah, we got a whole section on mounds. We may have to do this
Oh,
in
okay, I'm sorry.
two
I'll
separate
wait for
things
that.
here. But anyway, yeah, at one time, she asked about mounds, Indian mounds. There were both ceremonial mounds and there are mounds that really, nobody knows why they were constructed, because when an archaeologist comes along and digs a transect down in there, they don't find any artifacts. They don't know what it was, why they did that. Same thing with the shell mounds down on the coast. And Jan and I just 2 years ago, I think, went to the shell mounds in Allendale. Those are thought to be 12,000 years old. I think. So it's an incredible phenomenon. So anyway, they at one point, I have a dot map where an archaeologist in the 1800s surveyed not only South Carolina but Georgia for mounds. That was his deal, you know, that's his thing. You would not believe how they were clustered in our little corner, Jane and I's corner of the upstate, Greenville, Pickens, Oconee, and Anderson counties. Of the 300 dots in South Carolina, I would say as many as 200 of those dots were in that area I just described, the upstate. So they were heavily concentrated. Most of them have been plowed down now. People didn't recognize what they were or didn't care. So, okay, we're gonna have to cut it off now, except for questions, if anybody else has a question. Well,
I
folks,
would like to mention something.
yeah,
Dennis is going to be presenting at the Landrum Library on April 16th in the evening, not on this very same topic, but it'll be about the Cherokee Path and the Earl's Ford battle thing, right?
yeah, this is gonna be something I'm putting together just for this event in Landrum, a whole different slideshow, because there were, you know, obviously Jane and I love old roads. There were some historic old roads that came through that Landrum area that people are not aware of. Blackstock Road, the Tougaloo Path, I don't want to get off into what's all that.
Come see it.
But I think I wrote Pam in the promo blurb that the slideshow is about old roads and Revolutionary War battles in the vicinity of Landrum. And that's what? April
16th.
April
At
6th.
6 p.m.
Yeah.
Could you just give us a brief, could you just give us a brief synopsis about the Cherokee towns?
Yes, I'm gonna do Cherokee towns in 25 words or less. Because it was fairly consistent throughout prehistory and modern history too. Virtually every town had a council house. They were round in construction and quite large, surprisingly large. When William Bartram came through the Upper Savannah River in 1775, he described one that would hold 400 people. Now that's somebody who was there and saw it and said that building would seat 400 people. You know, you would think of something, 25 community leaders or something to get in. It was like an auditorium. So they had a council house, there would be individual dwellings, virtually every Cherokee family had a summer house and a winter house. The summer houses were rectangular, more open for more airflow. The winter houses were called hot houses. They were so well sealed up that they rarely wore clothes during the winter inside the house. Had a little central fire with a hole through the roof. The third component would be they had a community chest that if some family had fallen on hard times, there was a store of corn that they could rely on. And each family had its own store of corn or a corn crib built up on poles to keep rodents and bears and thieves away. And was pretty much sealed up. In other words, it was made out of small poles, vertical and then floor, and then all the gaps were sealed up with mud, so it was airtight for insects. So, folks, it's been a lot of fun, but we're a little over, and hope to see you in Landrum on the 16th.